Hey everyone, Zach Mason here. Welcome back to my channel. I have an interesting one for you today. There is a pastor by the name of Chris Reed. I had not seen him before, but he had what appears to be a very prophetic dream. He is with a ministry called MorningStar Ministries in South Carolina. Many of you may have seen this dream already. It has definitely gone viral. Lots of people have seen it. One of the reasons, again, because it is uh, symbolic in nature, similar to Dana Coverstone's dreams. The tone of it seems to be the way God typically speaks in dreams, but it's clear enough in its symbolism you can generally understand what it's predicting, what it's warning, and what's happening. And furthermore, Chris Reed, though I have not encountered him before, I did not know who he was. His spirit, we always look at the fruit of the spirit. The fruit of the spirit is peace, joy, etc., patience. The list. That is what I always look at to judge or discern is a better word. Discern whether I'm going to trust what somebody is saying or not. Um, and what I detect when I watch this message from Chris Reed is I detect humility, a meekness of spirit. I don't detect the self-glamorizing spirit that you see in a lot of televangelists that are intentionally being overly dramatic. I usually avoid those. But in him, I see humility, and I sense the spirit of a man who is submitted to God and his authority. And I don't sense someone who is seeking to glorify himself. He simply had a very disturbing dream that he considered prophetic, and he's reporting it. And it was strong enough, I felt the need to do an interpretation for you on here, similar to the ones that I've been doing for Dana Coverstone, because his dream is especially powerful because he saw a lot of newspaper headlines, um, which gave a clear indication of a way to measure timing of things and when we know this will be happening. But let me go ahead and play you the first part of his dream now.
Well, welcome to Prophetic Perspectives, where we look at current events through the lens of the Word of God and through the prophetic. I am Chris Reed, coming here from MorningStar Ministries out of Fort Mill, South Carolina. Well, I have something really, really important to share with you today. I've shared it with our team here and shared it with a few others, but I believe I had probably one of the most vivid, detailed dreams that I believe is from the Lord regarding an unfolding of events from this point forward. And I and my family, or my family and I, were up in Moravian Falls recently, and while I was there, I had this dream. So I want to share this with you, and I pray that you'll consider sharing this with your friends, telling other people about this, because I believe this is a dream from the Lord and is something that we really need to take heed as a warning to prepare. So this is the dream. I'll just read it to you. I had this dream on early morning, March 25th, 2022. And in the dream, I saw an unknown man who was dressed in a black suit, and he held a $50 US bill in his hand. And the dream consisted of him tearing the $50 bill in 3 different stages. And after each stage, I was handed by random people who came up to me to hand me newspapers, national newspapers here in the United States, with various unique headlines. So he stands in front of me and he takes the $50 bill, and the first tear, he tears off 1/3 of the $50 bill. And when he did, this is when people started coming up to me, bringing me national newspapers, one right after the other, with headlines that I could all read and were very vivid in my memory. And as soon as, of course, I woke up, I wrote this down. But the first one said, after he tore the $50 bill one third off, the headline read this: "The dollar drops 30% in value." And a subtitle to the headline was, "Mideast Oil Strikes Deal with China Instead of the U.S." I then was given another headline which said, quote, "The Perfect Storm," unquote, subtitled, "Inflation Reaches a New High." And then another person came up to me and handed me another news headline, which said, quote, "Food Shortage Crisis as Wheat and Bread Imports Are at a Stalemate," unquote. Another headline was then handed to me which said something like, quote, "Riots and Civil Unrest as Citizens Demand Entitlement Checks," unquote. Now, this was the only headline that I couldn't remember the exact wording of, but what I shared was close to it.
Okay, so he sees a man in black holding a $50 bill, right? Now, the $50 bill is significant. We're talking about that in a second. The man in black, he doesn't know for sure who it is. He makes a comment at the end. Someone who he talks to had to interpret a little bit, and they said, well, the man in black, Johnny Cash, and the man is holding cash. I like that. I like that interpretation. It you could say it's Jesus. I don't know that that's true. I mean, Jesus, we typically don't see him wearing black, so that would discourage us from that interpretation. Could be just a figure that God created to perform an action in a dream. But for now, let's just go with, since we don't have any, I don't think there's anything clear in this dream indicating this man is a Christ figure. He's more of a figure that is performing action symbolically at the instruction of God. He's either causing these things to happen, or he's just demonstrating to us in a visible way what is happening symbolically. Regardless, let's go with the Johnny Cash analogy for a minute, because Johnny Cash was known as the man in black, okay? But later, he became a Christian, and he changed his own nickname to be the man in white, right? So if this is the man in black, it would be the worldly, the pre-Christian, the worldly version of Johnny Cash. So this dream is talking about the world is doing this action, and that's a much stronger reason for me to definitely not interpret this as a Christ figure holding this $50 bill. But the world, as we see this man in black is tearing pieces off the $50 bill, and he's going to tear them off in 3 stages. But because it's the worldly version of Johnny Cash, or he's wearing black, this indicates that it is the world doing this to its own money. That the world is causing this, is damaging its own money. It says there's 3 stages, and then people come up to him with headlines after each stage. The first headline said, the dollar drops 30% in value, and a subtitle to the headline was, Middle East oil countries strike deal with China instead of the U.S. Okay, that headline seems straightforward, but let me explain a little more why that would happen. Because it says that second part about the oil deal between Middle East, specifically like OPEC, that would mean OPEC, led by Saudi Arabia, striking a deal with China instead of the U.S. Why is that a subtitle for the dollar drops 30% value? Because the value of the dollar is very much connected to the fact that oil is traded in dollars. In fact, a nickname for the dollar is often the petrodollar, because there is basically illegal. Globally, it is illegally to trade oil in any currency except US dollars. This is known. This is because this is required, the dollar has a fixed value. Like, that gives it value, almost like a gold standard of sorts, because countries have to buy dollars. They have to purchase dollars in order to buy oil or sell oil. And this automatically gives the dollar more value than it would have naturally. And because of this, it has become the world's reserve currency. And because of this stability being associated with oil this strongly, and there being considered an unending or a permanent demand, a never-ending demand for dollars, it has been an attractive investment for people of all nations to buy dollars. Therefore, everybody wants dollars because they're going to hold their value better than their own currencies because of this foundation in oil. And that creates wealth for us in the United States, because it almost inflates our currency beyond what it should. And it also means that when our federal government overspends and goes into debt and creates inflation of the US dollar, it's actually not only stealing money from lost value from our bank accounts, but it's actually stealing money from the bank accounts of Putin and President Xi and every other world leader and every other rich man or woman in the world that has an account in dollars. And all of those people in other countries know this. They're kind of miffed about it. They don't like it. They know we're taking from them, and that's part of how we get to keep borrowing and spending, because of this this dollar that's being propped up by this system. They all know it. Yet it's illegal to trade any other way. Banks won't allow it. The oil traders won't allow it. They know that the power of the U.S. government will fully come against them, even in a war. In war, we have done that, in order to protect this system, to protect our own national interest, right? Russia and China are keenly aware of this, and they're viewing an opportunity to break this system. For example, right now, Russia is demanding that countries in Europe pay for their gas, natural gas from Russia, in rubles. And the countries are outright refusing. They're refusing to do it. Why? Why are they refusing to just pay in Russian rubles? I mean, it's Russian gas. Shouldn't Russia have the right to be paid in whatever currency, in their own currency, if they want to? And the buyers are saying, no, it's illegal. We're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. Why? Because all of their wealthy elites, European elites, have accounts in dollars, in US dollars, and euros, which is also tied to the dollar. They don't have accounts in rubles. And they know that as soon as the first payments are made in rubles, that it's like a break in the dam. It's a breach in the dam where all chaos is going to break loose. And that, as soon as that breaks, as soon as that happens the first time, it's going to be historic. And the ruble would jump in value and the dollar would drop. And even more so if you have an oil deal between OPEC and China, where they're selling oil to China in yuan instead of dollars, instead of having to trade in dollars. So that is why this is connected, because if oil deals begin being done in yuan, in Chinese yuan, instead of dollars, the dollar would immediately drop in value, because suddenly it's viewed as less stable. because now you can do deals in any currency. The demand has suddenly dropped, so much so that people are like free. Now nations can start dealing in their own currencies and build up their own currencies and not the US dollar. It would be the mark of the end of the reign of the US dollar, and that is why it would drop over 30% in value. Now, what are we seeing? And this headline, I don't believe this has happened. We've seen inflation already start to happen, right? You've noticed inflation. And I think, frankly, inflation's already gone up, honestly, about 30%, 40%, if you're really looking around and honest. Not on everything. Milk is still the same, mainly because supermarkets use them as loss leaders, and they really eat a lot of the cost on that. But a lot of other things have gone up that much. But I don't think what we've seen already is this, because it's tied specifically to this headline. And while we've seen headlines that are foreshadowing this, I don't think we've seen the actual headline that this has happened yet. Now, I will say Saudi Arabia essentially leads OPEC. And right now, they are in heavy negotiations with China. And they are refusing to take calls or meetings with anybody in the Biden administration. It's unbelievable. They're literally refusing to take phone calls from the United States, from anybody in the government of the United States. That is a major sign. So this headline of Middle East oil strikes deal with China instead of US, I think that one's about to happen. So when it happens, I think you're going to see, boom, a surge in inflation again. That one would be pretty quick, pretty immediate. It won't be a slow build like we've had so far. Then the next headline read, "The perfect storm. Inflation reaches a new high." Then another person came up to me and handed me a news headline that said, "Food shortage crisis as wheat and bread imports are at a stalemate." Okay, so we have not seen this headline yet. If you've been paying close attention to the news, there is a lot of talk about food shortages. Now, I've been talking about the coming food shortages for a long time. I wrote my book, Revelation Unfolding, back in 2015 and published it a few years ago. And in that book, I was already talking about the coming wheat shortage that was predicted by the book of Revelation, which is the Black Horseman. But now we're seeing headlines where Russia has ceased the export. They have blocked the export of all fertilizer. And they supply 40% of the world's fertilizer that we need, that other countries need to plant wheat. Wheat and corn and certain other products are dependent on fertilizer, okay? On top of that, Ukraine is called the breadbasket of Europe. Some call it the breadbasket of the world. They are a major wheat producer. And their wheat is obviously soon going to be cut off from the market as well. Something else to consider. Farmers in the United States, it's been reported, this year already were not planting wheat because before the Russia invasion of Ukraine, fertilizer had already gotten so expensive that many of them didn't think that they were going to be able to sell it at a price that would recoup their investment. So they began planting soybeans instead. So many American wheat farmers planted soybeans instead of wheat this season. That means come this fall, there's going to be a severe shortage of wheat everywhere. So what would we normally do in that case? Well, we would tap into our stores. We would tap into our storage of stockpiled wheat, use that, and then that would give us a year, right, to get another season in, and tell all the farmers, please plant wheat, maybe even a government program to subsidize them on the fertilizer so they can plant it so we can all have bread. There's a problem, and that is that there are no stockpiles of wheat anymore. They are being depleted, and here's how. Not in every country. So Russia reportedly has stored up 5 years worth of food, including wheat. China has stored up 18 months worth of food, including wheat. On the other hand, China right now is buying up all of the stored wheat and other grains and food products that can be stored in United States warehouses and shipping them back to China. They've been buying up wheat out of Argentina. They've been buying up grains from every country they can. Some countries have cut them off because they said, no, we got to protect our own stores. The United States should be doing this, and we're not. The Biden administration is not stopping it. So we aren't planting new wheat, and China is shipping the stored wheat out of our own barns and silos back to China on trains and then boats. This is happening right now. Complicating this matter more, if you start searching around YouTube or the internet, you're going to see stories on food processing plants that are burning down at a historic rate, at an alarming rate. So many major food processing plants are being burned down that it's impossible that it's just coincidence and accidental. To the point where multiple major potato processing plants are burning down in the same week. And 2 different planes crashed into 2 different food processing plants and burned them down within very short time of one another. I can't remember a story about a single plane doing that before. And you ask, well, how could someone coordinate that? Well, simple. You can hack a plane, right? They could be hacked and forced into a nosedive or controlled. There's all kinds of ways. If somebody was very technologically sophisticated, they could do it. There's other ways I could paint out scenarios where it could be done on here, but I'm not going to take that amount of time. But it could be done. Following that, the FBI released an official warning, saying that food processing plants should be on the lookout for cyber attacks, that many food processing plants were being hit with cyber attack, breaking equipment, causing other kinds of issues. So somebody is definitely attacking our food processing plants. This would have to be, well, you have to ask yourself, who? There's only 4 possibilities in my mind. You got Russia, China, our own government, and some weird conspiracy, or Antifa groups. Okay. Frankly, I don't think the Antifa groups have the coordination to do this secretly. They're usually kind of amateurish, and they are violent, but they're amateurish. Don't think they could pull this off on this kind of scale, especially the cyber attacks. And that group Anonymous usually is not really fully aligned with Antifa, and I don't think they would do this. They're usually trying to be on the side of justice, at least their version of it. They don't want to deprive people of food. It doesn't make any sense that a group like Anonymous, it'd have to be a group like that level to do these kind of cyber attacks, would do this because of the way they've come to the defense of the people of Ukraine. It's not consistent. The Biden administration doesn't make sense. They're panicked just over oil prices, hurting their political chances. As much as you may want to believe that they would or are capable of doing this to their own country, I'm sure if they were being paid enough money by somebody to do it, they probably would. But we don't have evidence of that, and I don't see that. I do see 2 nations that benefit from our demise that have both stored up a lot of food and are playing the long game. Both Russia and China. Russia right now is being very belligerent. Wouldn't surprise me at all if they had sleeper cells in this country that were going around and burning down these plants, because they have a lot of food stored up. They've cut off the fertilizer to the rest of the world, and they think they're going to starve us into weakness come this fall, and they're just going to bide their time. That makes a lot of sense. China could be doing the same thing, right? Don't know which one. Those are my best 2 guesses. But the headline said, food shortage crisis as wheat and bread imports are at a stalemate. So that headline would have to happen at a time when we need the wheat, when we don't have enough ourselves. And that would probably be this fall, maybe September. I'm expecting the Saudi Arabia deal to be happening imminently. So that means that these other headlines, these first batches of headlines, this first phase of the dollar being torn would maybe be the next 6 months. I'm guessing. These are educated guesses. I'm not trying to be a prophet here. Okay. Um, but that headline means at some point we're trying to get deals done with other countries to import bread and wheat, and nobody's selling. Nobody's willing to give it to us. Why? Because the dollar's weak and they want to protect themselves. They know there's not enough wheat to go around. Their own citizens won't give them up. China and Russia and Ukraine certainly aren't going to give it to us because Ukraine will be under Russia's control, most likely. Last headline of this phase, riots and civil unrest as citizens demand entitlement checks. Okay, so, riots. There's a saying that says, you're always 9 meals away from anarchy. So when people start going hungry, after about 72 hours is when the riots start. When there's no food, 72 hours is when the riots start. Usually people will demand food. They will go crazy when they don't get food. So the first demand would be to the government. This makes sense. They say we need entitlement checks to help us pay these prices to get the food. But the government, as their politicians, naturally, I'm thinking the answer is going to be yes, we will give you entitlement checks. We will print money to help you buy food. But guess what that's going to do? Inflate the dollar more, meaning devalue the dollar more because there's more dollars out there. And it isn't going to increase the supply of food. Because in that moment when people can't buy food, it's not about they can't afford the food. I mean, yes, they'll be looking at very high prices, but it's because there's not enough. If there was plenty of food, the price would be low. So just because your government starts printing money doesn't mean you're going to be able to buy it. Because as soon as you print money, the dollar devalues. If this food is being imported or farmers have to import other things to fertilize or you name it, their costs go up, the price just goes up more. You still can't afford it. You don't get out of it by printing money. And by giving people entitlement checks, it doesn't solve the problem. You need more supply. And at that point, it'll be too late. By the way, if you have not began storing up food, you need to. I'm begging you to. Don't wait another week. Start today. You need 6 to 8 months of food stored up. And if this happens this year, this part, don't dip into it any more than you have to, because what this is describing is actually not the time where you really need that food stored up. There is coming a time later that I describe in a video in this channel called Phase 3 of the Red Horseman. That's when you're going to really need your food stores. So store up now so you're ready for this phase, but then try to still supply yourself without using up your stored food, unless you have to, so you can get all the way to that. And store up enough that you can be generous and still act like a Christian should and help those in need. If all of us Christians are able to be generous, it's going to go better with our neighbors that don't have any, okay, because they weren't prepared. We want to be able to help them. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and watch the next part of the dream.
Then in the dream, the attention was brought back on the man dressed in the black suit who held the $50 bill. This time he tore the $50 bill in half. And when he did this, an earthquake happened under my feet. Another person walked up to me and handed me a headline which read, quote, Israeli and Palestinian two-state solution reached, unquote. And then another person came up to me and gave me a headline which said, quote, Major earthquake hits the middle of the U.S., unquote.
Okay, so the next phase, the man tore the $50 bill, what was left of it, in half. Okay. By the way, I'm going to talk at the end about the difference between 50 and the $1 bill we see at the end. Why a 50? I believe Ulysses S. Grant being the person on it is important. But he tore the bill in half. And then headlines. When he did this, an earthquake happened under my feet, is what he said. Now, I want to point out, okay, so he's tearing the rest of the $50 bill in half, but that means that it's 1/3 of the original bill because he already tore 1/3 off. So when you tear 1/3 off, you have 2/3 left. And then he tears that in half, so that half is 1/3 of 2/3 of the 3/3 still. Make sense? But it has a greater impact on inflation because there's a smaller hole to begin with. Okay, so let me explain what this means. Every time he tears a piece off, it's indicating prices are going up faster than you might think. Okay, because of the laws, the way exponential curves work. So let me give you an example. I've got a chart here I created of predicted prices at different stages based on what he saw in the stream. And I'm just going to talk about gasoline for a minute because that's usually on people's minds and easy to understand. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about all the prices, your costs, and kind of where they will be, and even your income, where it will be. But gasoline right now, we've already experienced some inflation. Gas, I'm just going to pick an average, let's say $3.75. I don't know what gasoline per gallon is right now where you are for regular. If you're in California, it's probably $1 million. I'm not going to talk about California prices. The average American, let's say it's about $3.75. That's what it is in my area where I'm seeing it. Okay. At the first phase, when he tears off the first third, a gallon of gas would go up from $3.75 as a starting point up to $5.60. So almost $6. Okay. $5.60. So in the $5 to $6 range after that first third is torn off. So that right there hurts. You know, people are going to be really complaining about that. In fact, in that stage, well, let me read you basically what it's going. The first phase, you know, a cup of coffee, a latte that would cost you $5 will cost you $7.50. Then, if you pay $70 on average for your family to eat at a sit-down restaurant right now, that would go up to over about $105. So it's not undoable. Like you could still afford these prices, but it would hurt, and you would definitely cut back. This phase one is not a phase where your income is going to jump a ton and you're going to be cutting back. There will be pressure on companies to pay more. An entire tank of gas, let's say your gas is probably, a tank of gas for my truck is like $100 right now. Your car, if you have a car, it's probably less than that, but let's just go with $100 because it's easy number, easy math. Tank of gas to fill my truck is going to go up to $150. Woo! Can't wait. Groceries. If you spend about $1,000 a month on groceries, toiletries, etc., a lot of families, that's about what we're spending. You know, that's going to go up to about $1,500 a month. So again, a stretch, it hurts, but you feel like you can still make it. If your income kept up at that first phase, then if the average American household income was 50 grand a year, I think that was the last figure I knew. I think it's a little higher now, but if it was 50 grand, then if it kept up with inflation, it would go up to 74 grand. And you got to keep it, you'd say, well, okay, so if I was making more, then these prices wouldn't be so bad. I could still do it, right? The problem is income never quite keeps up. Okay, income is always lagging behind because employers are freaked out about their own costs, and their employees are calling for wage increases to help them pay for their goods, but employers are trying to keep their prices down, and their costs are going up too fast, and so their willingness to raise wages is slower than it is their prices, and workers struggle as a result. So I'm predicting that in this first phase, instead of going up to 74,000, the average American income would only go up to 55, 56,000. I think there would be some increase as people are complaining, but not a lot in this first phase. I just don't. That's my gut. The average house right now, let's say, is costing about $300,000. Go up to $450,000. You know, big jump. Housing would start to become unaffordable. In this phase, if you don't already own a house, you're going to be locked in where you're at, and you will not be able to sell your house because the housing market will start to cool off considerably as mortgage rates are higher and prices are higher, and people's incomes haven't gone up. So if anything, housing prices might go down a little because of that. But they can only go down so far because there's a basic cost to build. Now, one warning. Don't, as this happens, as inflation happens, the time to take out any loans or equity loans in your house or refinance your house or things like that is past. Don't do it now. Okay. And as this inflation happens, don't do it, because a lot of Americans are going to be faced with prices are high. I don't want to give up my lifestyle. The value of my house has gone up. My income at my job went up a little. I think I can afford it. I'm going to refinance my house and take some cash out. Okay. And I'm going to use that to keep my lifestyle going. Don't do that. Okay. Don't do that, because at some point there's so many things that can happen. One, your income won't keep up with the prices where they're going, and you're going to have trouble paying a mortgage payment, okay, at some point. And also, if the housing market crashes completely because the economy crashes and housing values go to the floor, banks have something called debt to income ratio and also loan to value. And if your loan to value, the loan amount on your house goes above a certain percent in relation to the value of your house, because the housing market drops, the value of your house is perceived to have dropped, the federal government may and will probably require banks to reevaluate and reappraise all these houses to see if they're still worth what they once were. And appraisers will come back in and say, no, it's dropped, it's dropped, it's dropped. And people with mortgages, the higher your mortgage as a percent of that value, the more likely the bank is to take your house, to call the loan and say, sorry, this is too much. You have too high a loan to value. We're going to take your house. Don't refinance your house now. It's too late. If you wanted to do it, I think you missed the boat. If you can do it in the next 30 days, you might be in time. I would not. I personally do. Well, I'm not a financial advisor. Don't sue me if you don't like my advice. Something bad happens. You miss out on something. It's your choice. I'm telling you what I would do. I would not refinance my house unless you can do it in the next 30 days. And even then, I think rates now are so high, I wouldn't do it. If you don't already have a low rate locked in, I wouldn't do it. All right, so this next phase, when he tears the next third off, so it's really a half. Before, gasoline went up from $3.75 to $5.60. Now it would go up to $11.19 a gallon, maybe as much as $12 a gallon. So the jump is much bigger because of the laws of exponents, because of the way math works. Okay, so this next phase, and this is why there's an earthquake. This is definitely a rumbling. At this moment, there's a lot happening that's causing a trembling across the country. And it's political and economic. And I'm going to explain the political in a minute. But economically, at this point, coffee, a latte would cost about $15. Gas is up at $11 to $12. A meal in a restaurant for your family of four, $208. A tank of gas for my truck will cost $300. Your monthly grocery bill will be $3,000 a month. If income kept up with inflation, you'd be getting $150,000 a year if you'd started at $50,000. So you'd be getting almost 3 times as much. But I've adjusted it to account for sociological principles and what will probably happen. And I'm anticipating the income at this phase. Companies will be forced to recognize that there's been a huge shift, a huge earthquake, an economic earthquake. And wages will naturally go up, and this will be part of what drives prices up so much, as well as the entitlement checks, presumably the government's going to be issuing, creating inflation. Those two things will cause prices to go through the roof. Food shortages, everything I'm anticipating. So this will be the most dramatic income change, and I do predict that income would go up to about 95 rather than 150. It won't get that high, but around 95,000 a year maybe. It's a good educated guess. Houses, the average house is going to be costing 900,000 at that point. Very unaffordable. So, and then we've got more phases coming. But let's talk about this earthquake. Earthquakes are God's symbol for a conflict within the kingdom. So while I do think it's connected to a financial earthquake of sorts, there's a bigger one, and we see it. Another person came up to me and handed me a headline that read, Israeli and Palestinian two-state solution reached. And when Chris Reed did this video, at this point, I knew I had to do commentary on this dream. Because why would he dream that headline? No one I've seen has anticipated that headline. But that makes everything else make sense. Because we've seen there's thousands of Christians that have had dreams about a civil war, about the United States dissolving, and we see more headlines about that here. Major earthquake hits the middle of the U.S., and we recall the other dreams. I've got on this channel a compilation of earthquake dreams where people have seen a huge earthquake, which may be the earthquake of Revelation of the sixth seal. It could also be the earthquake at the end of the book of Revelation, at the seventh bowl, I think, sixth bowl. Yeah, sixth, I forget off the top of my head. I'll have to go back and look. But there's a major earthquake at the end, and it could be either one of those, but I don't think this one is either one of those. I think this is just a major quake because it's not the whole earth. And this just says hits the middle of the U.S., so I don't think it's one of the major earthquakes of Revelation. But in those dreams about the big ones that do happen, they see the Mississippi River becoming an ocean, a channel of an ocean. It's where the eastern and western United States, parts of the United States, are completely separated in two different continents. And it's physically divided. So, but this is a forewarning of that. I don't believe this is that. I believe this is a forewarning. It just says major earthquake hits the middle of the U.S. and only the middle of the U.S., not the whole earth, right? But why? Because if an Israeli and Palestinian two-state solution is reached, that would be initiated and pushed and pressured on Israel by the United States, as we've been leading that effort to pressure them for years. And God says very simply, if you divide my land, my people's land, I will divide yours. If you divide Israel, I will divide you. That's his response. If you doubt that, here's a great book I'm going to show you. I strongly recommend getting a copy of this and reading it. Let me get put it in the camera, sorry. Going backwards. Eye to Eye by William Koenig, Facing the Consequences of Dividing Israel. Eye to Eye. Great book. Full of very interesting things. In there you will see event after event after event where the United States or another country does something to push, pressure, or fund the establishment of a Palestinian state within the land that God covenanted to Israel, Isaac, and Jacob to be the land of Israel. And every time a country does that, a natural disaster happens coinciding with that date that matches what was done most often. Everything from Hurricane Katrina to the tsunami that hit Japan to the earthquake that hit Chile, all of these things are in there. Even to the point where one story, first President Bush, 1989, I think was the year in here. I'm not fresh on this story, but Yasser Arafat, who was the head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, was a terrorist organization in Israel, was invited to the United States, to come to the United States for the first time by President Bush. The moment Yasser Arafat's plane landed on U.S. soil, a freak hurricane formed out in the Atlantic and hovered over Kennebunkport, Maine, for the entire time Arafat was in the country. The moment Arafat's plane left and took off again, that hurricane dissipated and went away. And Kennebunkport, Maine is the home where the home of the first President Bush was. So the book is full of examples like that. Strongly recommend getting it. Very interesting. And God is now I understand everything. This is why a civil war would happen in the U.S. because if we provoke Israel to be divided, he's going to divide us. It's that simple. On top of abortion, on top of gay marriage, on top of all of these sins that we're seeing prevalent in our society, including increased idol worship, the final straw is us dividing the land of Israel and forcing Israel to give up land to people he has not promised it to. We're pressuring Israel to break God's promise to them. So he's going to divide us. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and watch the next part of the dream.
Then the man in the black suit took the rest of the $50 bill and he started tearing it in smaller pieces. So the first time he tore off 1/3. The second time he tore off half of the $50 bill. And now he takes the rest of the $50 bill and tears off in small pieces, one by one. And then another person walks up to me and hands me another headline which read, quote, "America in Pieces," unquote. And it was subtitled as this, quote, "More states secede from the nation in rebellion to the federal government," unquote. I was then handed another headline. Another person came up and handed me a headline which said, quote, "U.S. military takes charge as uncertainty looms over the federal government," unquote.
Okay, so now the man in black is tearing up the bill into small pieces one by one. As he's doing this, every time you tear off a piece, the impact on prices goes up dramatically, more and more and more than you might realize. And how many pieces? Is he tearing off 50 little pieces to match 50 states? Because the headline is, "America in Pieces, More States Secede from the Nation in Retaliation to the Federal Government." Okay, and U.S. military takes charge as uncertainty looms over the federal government. Okay, so at this point, after the first two phases, this is when the Civil War happens. A lot of people think this might happen as early as next year. I mean, if you combine the dramatic forcing of Israel to give up land with food riots, with massive inflation, economic devastation, and perhaps an administration refusing to acknowledge elections in which the conservatives or Republicans won, that would be a situation where many states might say, enough is enough, we're done, we're seceding. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and that's what people have seen in the dream. In fact, there's a forum on Reddit, I've been told, I'll try to provide more information about this in the future, where there's a lot of discussion about people who've had dreams about this stage in American history, America's future, and they've seen, I think it's about 12 different factions, political groups that are warring against each other. I think it's like 4 on the left, 5 on the right, 3 that are neutral libertarian, and it describes their government, how they're interacting with each other, the geographical areas they're over. It's very, very interesting. I haven't really had a chance to study it much. Would it happen next year? I don't know. That's what a lot of people are thinking because of the midterms, etc. And if all this stuff happens this fall, it could happen a lot quicker than we think. Things do seem to be moving faster than they would otherwise. I'm not saying it absolutely will. We'll find out. But you need to be ready, spiritually ready and physically ready. Stored food, spiritually prepared to keep representing God, and be generous with your neighbors. But anyways, let me give you a little idea on prices here. Again, where did my sheet go? What did I do with my sheet? Sorry. Well, there it is. Sorry. Okay. The final stage here, you would just see we left the price of a gallon of gas at $11.19. As these pieces are being torn off, it would start creeping up: $12.50, $13.99, $15.99, $18.66, $22.39, $28, $37, $55 a gallon. You tear off the last little piece, and you're up to around $111 for a gallon of gas. That's kind of the progression you would see across the board. So at this final stage, when the dollar is becoming virtually worthless, I mean, there's really no limit to how high these prices. If in Germany after World War II, or maybe after World War I, I don't know, but there was reports of men carrying wheelbarrows full of money just to buy a loaf of bread. Venezuela's had very similar situations. If your currency becomes almost worthless, then prices, there's no limit, right? So coffee was $150 for a latte. Restaurant meal, if you would even be going to a restaurant at this point, $2,000. Tank of gas, $3,000. Groceries, $30,000 a month. If the income kept up, the average American would be earning $1.5 million a year. So it kind of makes sense how you could afford that. But my calculations are that the average income will not keep up, and you'd probably only be getting $400,000 a year. That still sounds like a lot in today's dollars. If you had today's prices, you'd be doing great. But if food is costing $30,000 a month, and the average family is that's $360,000 a year. That means that your average family income would only be able to afford groceries and almost nothing else. Okay, so we would become a poor nation. By the way, houses would be selling for $8 to $10 million, the average house. So you can see the dollar would just be worthless, but people would not have a lot of them is the problem. That would be the problem. It's not really how much does something cost, it's how much does something cost in relation to how much you make. That's the real problem. All right. So when this happens, we would definitely be in a crisis. So let's watch the last part here. And then we'll talk about that.
Then the man dressed in the black suit took out a new dollar bill. It was not the $50 bill. It was a $1 US bill. But what was interesting about it was in the dream, the $1 bill looked like a cell phone. It was a $1 bill, but it looked like a cell phone. I did see George Washington's face on it, but it looked very different than a normal $1 bill. And I remember looking at it and just studying it and was kind of, pondering why this $1 bill looked like a cell phone. And when I am pondering this, another person comes up, hands me another headline, and the newspaper headlines read, quote, "New currency for a renewed nation," unquote. Another headline was handed to me and it said, quote, "Simplicity restored as Americans grow their own food again," unquote. And I woke up.
Okay, the man in black took out a new dollar bill and George Washington's face was on it. So this was a $1 bill. Okay, a $1 bill, which is evidenced by George Washington's face, but it looked like a cell phone. He was initially confused by that, but it's really simple. It just means it's a digital currency that will have no cash form. You will not be able to deal in, when this comes out, there will be no cash. Nobody will have cash anymore. That will allow them to control it a lot better. They'll know exactly how many dollars are out there, which is setting us up for something worse in the future. But nevertheless, this is what it's seen. This is where we're going. In fact, the Biden administration just ordered the federal government to begin a study of what it would take to issue a new digital currency. And you may think, well, most dollars are digital already, right? Most dollars are already digital. Very little cash is out there, but you can still get your dollars in cash. If you go to the bank and ask for your money in cash, they have to give it to you, and people have to accept it. It is possible to have wealth, to have cash, to have money put in your own safe, in the wall of your house, into your own control, and at any point you can put it back in the banking system if you want to, but if you don't want to, you still have it, and you still have control of it. A digital currency, that's not true. You would not have access to wealth or the ability to buy and sell without a cell phone. Okay, and then future mark of the beast on your hand, right? This isn't indicating that we're at that phase yet. It's just the beginning of that system. Significant. There's a significance, I think, also, and I think Chris Reed and others have talked about this, but the $50 bill is how it started, and the $1 bill is how it ended. So I think there's three aspects of that to look at. First, the number 50. The number 50. 50 has a higher value than 1. So we see the dollar used to be worth a lot. It used to be worth strong in the global economy. And at the end, it is 1. It's lost a lot of its value, a lot of its global prestige. It is not as strong. If the math is consistent, it means that this future digital currency will have 1/50th the purchasing power or the global prestige that the original dollar bill, the current dollar bill, has. That means that after this, the United States will not be as powerful. It will be a diminished value, diminished power in the world. I don't think we'll be out, but we will be dropped down a couple of pegs. Also, 50, I think Chris Reed may have said this, but it does seem to correspond neatly to the 50 states. And at one point, the man in black is tearing off pieces corresponding to the headlines about American states seceding from the Union. I do think that the 50 then is also referring to the fact that we're 50 separate states. We're divided. We're divided as a country among 50 states. And after this, with the new currency, will be 1. Perhaps there will no longer be individual states. Perhaps the resolution of this civil war is that it'll be 1 country. Is it 1 country just politically, like no more states? Or is it 1 country actually in spirit? Maybe there's some repentance that's happened. Maybe the Civil War in this phase has brought us to a time of repentance. That's very possible. Okay. Ulysses S. Grant is the president on the $50 bill. And my history on that, I'm a little rusty, but I'm remembering about the progression of Lincoln and Andrew Johnson as vice president, and then Grant. Now, between the three, Lincoln wanted to not be too harsh on the South when the Civil War was over. He wanted to be gentle and basically help them rebuild and restore them to the Union. And Andrew Johnson, if my memory is correct, wanted to pursue that. He wanted to continue with Lincoln's vision of doing that. And a lot of the Republicans in Congress at the time, because the Republicans controlled Congress at that time, didn't want that. They wanted vengeance. They wanted to be very harsh on the South and punish them for all the cost and lives lost in the Civil War. And so they actually, if I recall, that was the main reason why they impeached Andrew Johnson, because he was resisting their efforts to do that, and so they wanted him out. But Ulysses S. Grant, the man who won the Civil War for Lincoln, he was the general who won it. He was also known as a drunk. So the man on the $50 bill was a drunk who won the war. He was the general who won the war after the Civil War, but he was also the president at the beginning of Reconstruction, that phase of history where the South was treated very harshly and the federal government was greatly strengthened. So before that phase, that phase of American history, states had a lot more rights. After the Civil War, the federal government became very strong and began creating a lot of the problems we see today of the government having too much power in our lives. So I think that Grant represents a worldly president who basically began us on the path of strong federal government that we have today that is such a problem. And we're seeing George Washington's face on the new digital currency, which has indicated to me that it'll go back to simplicity, to the more simplistic founding fathers' vision of how our government was supposed to operate. And George Washington was a godly man, whereas Grant was a worldly man, right? So that is encouraging. The headlines say new currency for renewed nation, and I think that matches what I just talked about. And also simplicity restored, matching again what I just talked about, as Americans grow their own food. Again, an indication of poverty, of we're not as wealthy as we used to be. Those two headlines line up exactly with what I think we see between the $50 bill going to the $1 bill, but also as a digital cell phone. Now, one more thought about that. What does that mean, and how does it fit with everything else? I've talked about this in other videos. I believe that there is not going to be a revival now, but after this initial, there's going to be like this chaos in our country, and then this brief time of restoration, and I believe that is corresponding to Revelation chapter 7 and early 8, where there's the silence in heaven, and the missionaries, the 144,000 are sealed and sent out as missionaries, and that is the time of the great revival. I'm believing and guessing, educated guess, that is going to begin at that time, after this initial war and chaos. But anyways, that's just my interpretation of that dream. We'll see how history actually plays out. I hope this was helpful to you and insightful, and regardless, God is in control. He's on the throne. There is no need to fear anything. Why? Because if you're a believer in Jesus Christ, what's the worst that can happen? We go to be with Him. We have nothing to fear. But if He is warning us because He loves us for our own good, we should take heed and be prepared. Prepare yourself, especially spiritually. And I'm going to be talking soon about a course called Path to Strength, which will help you get prepared spiritually, which really means strengthen your heart for what's coming. But anyways, for today, have a great day, and we'll see you soon.